What is an outsourced CCO? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA Question and Answer series. It is question number 58. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can see the show notes from today's episode, as well as all of the other resources I put out there from the video series, podcast series, white papers, all kinds of great resources. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a very important topic, and it's compliance related. Now, compliance is not the most exciting, sexy topic in the entire RIA space, but it is one of the most important topics that needs to be managed in that RIA space. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is one of the ways you can manage that responsibility. So with that, for those of you watching on video, I have Jeff Chapman with Dinsmore Compliance Services. Jeff, thank you for joining us.
Brad, thanks for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to just talk a little bit about compliance with your team.
Absolutely. And I think it's going to be a good conversation. So just a quick kind of lead in, and then I'm going to turn it back to Jeff to provide a little background on himself and his firm. So any RIA, if you were to start an RIA, you are responsible for compliance, and there are pros and cons to that. I've talked about this topic in a number of episodes, and the question is, how do you manage that responsibility? So for some folks, you might join an existing RIA, and at that point, you're essentially outsourcing that responsibility to someone else. But to the degree you are going to have your own RIA, you do need to manage that responsibility somehow. And there's different flavors of how you can do that. And so what we're going to be talking about on today's episode is the concept of an outsourced CCO. So an outsourced chief compliance officer. That's what Jeff's the expert on. He's going to help us understand what that is and how that might be a fit for your individual practice. So Jeff, before we dive into the questions, if you could give a brief background on yourself and your firm, I think that would be helpful.
Great. Thanks, Brad. I've been in the financial services industry for over 30 years. Most of that time in running businesses, mostly capital markets businesses for regional banks. As you probably know, after the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, that became a lot less interesting. So my partner, Kevin Woodard, and I formed our firm in 2016. Kevin and I had worked together and have worked together now for over 20 years in some form or fashion. He is the compliance expert. He supported my businesses and in the capital markets arena. And I always had a great working relationship with him, as he is the compliance officer that is not the hell no compliance officer. He always understood this is a business we have to operate. Please identify the risks and let us make business decisions. And that was a great working relationship, and I think is what you're looking for in a compliance officer. So we talked about forming our firm and taking this on the road, as we understood, frankly, that there's a great need for compliance expertise out there for investment advisors. And those advisors many times form their firm. And we like to say it's a bar bet somewhere that somebody loses and has to have that CCO responsibility. And it just isn't what they got in the business to do. So we think it's a great opportunity for advisors who are forming or are growing and need more expertise to outsource that function. And we formed our firm in 2016, and it's been a real ride since then. We've had a lot of acceptance. We've got clients across the country, and we really have exceeded our expectations in terms of growth. So we found a real need, and we're filling that need.
Terrific. Well, I think that's a wonderful background. That's going to dovetail perfectly into some of these questions. So to start with, and you kind of alluded to it, for the viewers here that are listening or watching, or whatever the case is, that aren't familiar, if you start an RIA, what is that CCO responsibility? So obviously, okay, generically speaking, I'm responsible for my own compliance, but are you required to name a person? Do you have to hire a person? What is the requirement there from just kind of a baseline?
Yeah, under Rule 20647, it's required that you name someone a CCO. Um, and you have to establish policies, procedures, and manuals that are going to guide your firm and have them be consistent with SEC rules. And then it's required that you review those rules on an annual basis. So it's absolutely required that you fill this position, and some person, a real person, has to be named for that responsibility. So coming out of the gates, someone will be the named CCO.
Yeah, and you can see, for those that don't know, I mean, if you look at any RA's ADV, it literally has to name who that person is. In your experience, just in general, and we'll get into again what an outsourced CCO is, but I typically see, an RA, until you get to a size that you're so big that you can potentially afford to hire a full-time compliance person in-house. It usually is just someone wearing a multiple hat, and it could be the main principal, the main owner. And you kind of alluded to, hey, where's it you want to spend your time? But they also are that named CCO. Is that generally what you see with, smaller mid-sized firms? Again, if you get to a couple billion, maybe you have the resources to hire in-house, but is that typically what you see?
It is typically what we see. And so as someone is named that CCO, they also might be listed on the ADV as the chief investment officer and the CEO. And I will tell you that the SEC over the last couple of years has said that they are looking for people that wear multiple hats, and they're realists. They understand that probably the CCO work is the last thing on the day that the person's working on. So when they see people wearing multiple hats and have multiple titles in the firm, they get extra scrutiny. And we think that that's an opportunity to outsource that function and make sure that's taken care of.
And so short of that full outsource, which we're going to dive into, so in theory, as I point out to folks, there's no regulatory response or requirement, that says you have to engage any sort of third-party compliance consultant firm to help you with any of it. Now, it's absolutely the best practice. It's absolutely utilized by essentially every RA that is trying to do the right thing. Personally, if someone came to me and they wanted to start an RA and they said, I'm not going to use one of those folks, I would not even work with them, because that's just a sign they're not willing to do this correctly. But for that typical scenario that they are, and I've done episodes on the different kinds of compliance consultants and things like that. What is something short of this outsource? And the reason I'm doing this is just kind of build it up to understand, okay, how it changes or how it's different. What is when a RA works with someone's got that multiple hat on and they're working with a compliance consultant, what does typically that arrangement look like from a who's doing what perspective?
So when folks are forming an RIA, many times they'll reach out and find a consultant, a compliance consultant. While we do some of that work, about 80% of our work is the outsourced CCO work, but folks will reach out, find a compliance consultant to help them form their advisor, to help them establish policies and procedures and manuals, and turn it over to the firm and have that person in the firm that's named CCO manage that function going forward. So it's kind of like, here's your plan. Now you execute it. And again, while a lot of people might have a legal background or a compliance background or a COO kind of background, it's not their expertise and it's not what they do on a daily basis. So many times it gets short shrift, and it's not something that they enjoy doing, so they don't spend a lot of time on it. When the annual review or the annual updates to ADV come around, that's probably the next time they look at their compliance program. And so it's not something that we advise. Obviously, we're in the business of offering outsourced chief compliance officer, but that's the way a lot of people get started.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the majority of them. I think there is some that aren't unfortunately doing anything, which again is highly inadvisable, and then the majority are engaged in some sort of consultant. And so, for that advisor, for that team that's going to have that RIA, maybe already does have an RIA, and some of this is resonating. They say, yeah, I really don't like being responsible for those things or spending the time on those sorts of things. So that leads us to, what is an outsourced CCO? So we know we have to have a named person. There's things that should be done to manage all this. So if someone comes to you, what is that offer? What do you do as a quote unquote outsourced CCO?
So a fully outsourced CCO means one of our staff, one of our experienced chief compliance officers will be named on the ADV of the advisor as the chief compliance officer. And they really become a team member. So they are not only advising and developing the policies and procedures and manuals, but they're actually operating the program. So it's as if you had an on-site chief compliance officer on your team. We offer a somewhat lesser service than that, which we call CCO Light, in that we will operate that will establish the policies, procedures, and manuals, all the same work, but someone on the RIA, in the RIA, will operate that and will be listed on the ADV. So while we run the exact same programs, it's sometimes preferable to the RIA to have their person still named on that ADV, and that's another option for us. But we take a considerable amount of time when we have a new client, whether they're already established or they're establishing an RIA, to onboard them. The onboarding process takes about 2 months so that we fully understand the type of business that this advisor wants to run. It really, our model is not based upon AUM. It's based upon the model of the business that is run there. So it's how many IARs do you have? How many locations do you have? What is your portfolio management strategy? Do you do a lot of advertising? So we spend quite a bit of time to establish those policies, procedures, and manuals that are customized to that individual RIA. There are a lot of other consultants out there that have what I would deem a template that is kind of pushed down to the advisor and tried to make that fit into what they're up to. But we customize every compliance program that we design for that individual advisor. And it takes a considerable amount of time to get to know them. And we really want to become embedded, if you will, with that advisor so that we're part of that team.
So you might have just kind of answered my next question with that thought there of just how much time you spend with them to understand the business, understand the practice, because a lot of advisors are trying to move away from that broker dealer world, or maybe that large firm model, in part because they feel, oh, compliance just tells me no, I can't do anything. They're not willing to consider new things, or whatever the case is. I want to get away from that. And yes, I realize I'm gonna have some responsibility to do it myself, but that's a whole lot better than this, this horrible situation I had before. So how do you balance that or navigate that of your responsibility if you're going to take the CCO role, and the role you play is to help that RIA stay out of trouble, at the same time not given the same experience that they had before of the compliance is a hindrance, not a help?
So one of the things that we do is that part of that onboarding process is really we're evaluating the client as much as they're evaluating us. So maybe an overused term is the culture of compliance. There are advisors that we don't want to work for, that just say, yeah, let's check that compliance box, but we're going to do what we're going to do. That's not the kind of folks that we want to work with. We really want to check to make sure that they indeed are going to operate their business in an upright fashion, and that they're going to comply with the rules that we establish. So it's really a two-way street, and there are advisors that we declined to work with. So while they may be coming from a bigger firm or a BD background, the BD is more rules-based, and as opposed to the SEC type of compliance procedure. So they've generally had somebody that they've relied on for their compliance questions, but it might be 3 offices down, they never meet that person and they don't have a relationship with them. If you have a compliance officer that's embedded in your firm and understands what you want to do, what we like to say is, hey, we know where you want to get to. We don't think you can do it the way you've proposed it. Here's another way to get to the same answer that'll be within the compliance procedures that we've established for you. So we want to be business partners. Sometimes there are there are opportunities to make a business decision. Here's the rule. Here's where we are. Here's how much risk you might take on this opportunity. But at the end of the day, it's a business decision, and we want to identify opportunities for folks to get to the right answer.
Yeah, I think that's important, is that risk spectrum, right? Of a lot of stuff. Some stuff's black and white and binary, and that's perhaps helpful because those are easy decisions to make. But a lot of it's that, okay, where are we on the comfort level, the spectrum level? And so having someone like you kind of explain, or you and your team explain what the options are and why one might be better than another, I think is certainly a value add for sure. What about and I'm almost kind of going reverse chronological order of how someone might work with a firm like yours, but let's say they've talked to you, they've talked to your team, they like everything. And so maybe it's an existing RIA right now, or it's someone that's looking to transition to the RIA model. They like your story. They like this concept of outsourced CCO. And I think you alluded to it, but just to clarify, how long does that process take from the time they kind of get engaged with you to the point where, okay, kind of things are up and going? And it's always an evolution, right? But a lot of work has to be done on that front end. I mean, realistically, what kind of timeline is that looking at?
Yeah, right now the SEC, it gets back to us on applications. I think they're required in 45 days. They're at about 30 days right now. So we like to say, give us 60 days for a launch. And we think that gives us enough time to identify your business strategy and how you want to operate, gets us the ability to file the proper framework if it's a new RIA. If it's an existing RIA, we still like to get about 60 days of onboarding, because we're going to spend a lot of time with the principals of the firm to understand what they're doing. One of the things the SEC doesn't like is if you, in fact, purchased a policies and procedures type of manual that is a template, if you will, it might say you're doing things that you're not. The SEC doesn't like that. They want, if it says you're doing something in your manuals, they're going to look for it. And many times they'll come in and say, hey, it says you're doing this, but we don't see any evidence of that. Why is that in your manuals? And that happens when people get kind of shoved down into a box. So we specifically design each program for the individual advisor's business model. The long answer to your question there, but about 60 days is what we think a good onboarding takes.
Yeah, that's good. I would be worried if you said 10 days, because I'd say, well, that runs counter to everything you just said about needing to really dive in and make it a partnership. So I think 60 days is quite reasonable. So all this sounds great. Okay, great. Well, I can have my RIA. I can meet my compliance responsibilities and not have to do it entirely on my own, and I can outsource it. Oh, fantastic. So of course, it always comes down to price. So everything has a cost. And obviously if you're going to use a solution that provides more value, it's going to cost more. So typically, how do you price out this type of service?
So our business model is run much as an RIA's money management model is. It's although we're not asset under management based, it is a retainer type of an arrangement. So we charge a fixed retainer, which allows the advisor to budget and not think that we're going to get nickel and dimed or have to get charged every time we have a call or every time we have a question. So we'll quote up front an annual fee. That includes at least one on-site visit every year by your compliance officer, more if you like. We'll run your calendar, which can be events-based or day-based. The fee is what we like to refer to as, it's going to cost you about 1/3 of what it would cost you to have a dedicated CCO in your office that you're going to go out and hire. So I'm a little reluctant to quote numbers, but our fee is either side of $50,000 annually for most of our clients. We think that's a great value because you have access to an entire compliance department. And another advantage I would say to having an outsourced CCO is if you have your own CCO and they're sending their kids to college, they're going to want to keep that job. And they might be reluctant to give you the answer that you want to hear more times than not. And so one of the things that we say is to have an outsourced CCO, we're going to give you the down and dirty answer that sometimes you're not going to want to hear, but it's going to keep your business running and in good stead with the SEC. So that's what we think is another advantage. Well, one other thing I'll mention while we're here, Brad, is that the other advantage is when the SEC does come calling, and they will, and right now they're about once every 7 years for the average advisor. We're on site. If we're the outsourced CCO, our chief compliance officer will be on site as long as the SEC is. Now, during COVID here, they haven't done any on-site exams, but that day's probably coming back at some point. And when it does, our CCO will be on site until they leave. And so when the CEO and the CCO get the letter for documents that are required, that comes to us, and we will prepare everything and we'll be ready for them, and we'll be there until they're gone.
There's certainly a lot of peace of mind that comes from having that partner there on site physically to help through that process. So I always explain anytime folks might ask me kind of how much these things cost, and I think it's just like you alluded to, it's more expensive than doing the variation where you're hiring someone to kind of give you guidance and then you're still retaining the responsibility yourself. But to your point, significantly less money than what it would cost all in with salary and benefits and everything for an experienced. That's the key too, not just have someone on your team, but someone experienced to do it yourself. Your price range, that's only a fraction of what that would cost someone to have a sole provider right there. That's the only thing they do in-house on the team. So related to that, and we can kind of come to conclusions on some numbers, but I mean, what size RIA do you see this really making sense? And so my take, and then I welcome yours, is obviously, and you keep alluding to SEC. So for those watching that don't know, that's 100 million and above, you'd be SEC registered. And then there's just also economics with that. So even if you were smaller than that, at some point you say, okay, hey, it's tough to hire this kind of solution. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you arguably could get so large that maybe you can't afford to have people on your staff, and they might still consider outsourcing, but that math works. But so where's that kind of sweet spot that you think of it's a great solution and that your experience and people seeing the value in it?
Yeah, probably 90% of our clients are between, and I know this is a big range, but from 250 million to 1.5 billion. Most folks over that size, they probably are going to bring that in-house, and we certainly understand that. One of the things that we do, we've got clients that are much larger than that, and they use us to augment their own compliance staff for projects or new rule implementations or something of that ilk. But most of the folks, when they get to $250 million in assets under management, they're creating some decent revenue, and they understand the value that gets taken away from their clients and managing their portfolios by compliance. And compliance is, SEC rules are living and breathing and flexing all the time. So there are a couple new rules coming in this year. Do you want to read that, start with a blank piece of paper and implement that in your own advisor? Or do you want to work with somebody who's done that for hundreds of other people and can do it for you and make sure that you're compliant on the date that it's required? So that answer, I think about 250 million, I think really makes a lot of sense. Now, Brad, we also work with state registered folks in helping them establish their RIA. So we do some work like that as well, where we'll charge a fee to get them registered and get their policies and procedures. But because there's 50 states, we're not experts in all 50 of those states and the regulatory environment in every state. So we can help people get registered as a state advisor, but we will not serve as a chief compliance officer.
Yep. For that 100 billion and above. Yeah, it's certainly, while it's not easy to stay on top of everything the SEC related, and that's why folks like you and your firm exist, is to pay attention to all those things. It is a magnitude more difficult to try to stay on top of 50 different state securities regulators or whatnot and the various changes. For someone, as we get close here to wrap it up, I'll dovetail secondly into your specific contact information. But for someone that this is maybe resonated and they think this might be a good solution, a question I'm always a big fan of. I always want to help people understand what they can expect when they reach out. So let's say someone gives you a call, they've seen this episode, they've listened to this episode, they've never spoken to you otherwise before. What does that first conversation look like?
Yeah, so we're going to explain our value proposition to those folks, and we're going to want to talk to the principals in the firm and talk to them about, if there's a couple different scenarios here. If they're a breakaway firm, that they're leaving a wirehouse or a larger bank, and they want to establish, that conversation's a little bit different than someone that says, listen, I'm pulling my hair out because I've been trying to do this compliance thing myself. So those conversations are, here's what we do. We know we're not the cheapest guys in town, but there's the value that you're going to get from this. You're not going to have to think about this again, because we're going to run your program for you, and we're going to run a pristine program that when the SEC comes in, you're going to be very comfortable with that. So it takes some time, again, to have that conversation with our potential clients. A lot of them say that's more than I want to spend, or that's more than I need right now, and we understand that. I will tell you that many people have gone to Plan B, and they come back to us and say, listen, I'm getting nickel and dime to that. All right, I understand where you're coming from now. I didn't realize I would still be doing all the work by going to Plan B here. So we're not the hard sell guys. Here's our value proposition. Here's what we're going to charge you. And if you think this is right for you, we're going to have a pristine program for you.
Perfect. If someone wants to have that conversation, what's the best way to get a hold of you or learn more about your firm?
Yeah. So it's Dinsmore Compliance Services. So you can check our website, dinsmorecomplianceservices.com. It's a little wordy, but my email is jeff.chapman at dinsmorecomplianceservices.com. And Brad, you've got my contact information if they want to contact you. We think we've got a great program that works for a lot of folks, and we're busy right now. There's a lot of people, as you know, breaking away and forming their advisor. There's a couple new rules coming this year that are keeping people very focused on their compliance program. So we're working with them on that. So it's good times in the business right now. And we appreciate all the support we get.
Indeed. Well, I will include that contact information in the show notes. So for anyone that didn't write that down, it will be in the show notes. You can access it that way. And I would say, a reminder to everyone out there that has never been in the RA world and might be moving to it or be thinking about moving to it. One of the beauties of that is if you have been your whole career, perhaps in that captive employee model or maybe a 1099 model, and, compliance is there. You don't have any say over who's on the team or how they interact. They basically just dictate to you how things are done. And the beauty in the RIA world, you have the ability to go out and hire the compliance consultant firm yourself. You, the advisors, are their clients. And now the compliance consultant firm still has an obligation to perform their job, try to keep you compliant, keep you from running afoul of rules. But the nice thing is, for arguably a lot of advisors, the first time in their career, they have say. So if that compliance partner is not responsive to their needs or is not open to thinking through solutions, you can find another compliance provider that you think maybe has a better value proposition. And so that's a great feeling for advisors it's kind of almost a full 180 of not just being dictated to, but Jeff, as you talked about, actually having a partnership, and Jeff and his team have an interest in retaining your business, so they do need to be responsive. They do need to be willing to think things through. And again, you have to respect, you are hiring them to tell you when you should not be doing things or that things should be done differently. So there is a balance there, but it's by no means a one-way street, which for many advisors currently it is. So as a reminder, again, contact information in the show notes. If you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you'll be able to see the show notes, as well as all of the other resources I put out there, the video series, podcast series, white papers, all kinds of things. You can find it there, but hopefully everyone found this a useful resource to understand this concept of outsourced CCO. Again, it is kind of a niche solution by design, because as you can tell from everything Jeff described, not just anyone and everyone can provide this kind of solution. And so I think it's important to have it in your consideration pool and understand what it is and think about whether it is a right fit for your particular practice. So Jeff, with that, I appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks, Brad. Glad to be here.
All right, now.